you watch it enough and then you realize that Billy Van is everybody. You don't know that right away. When you're young, you're watching it, you just think it's actors. And then you start to realize over time, oh, Billy Van is doing everything, which shatters the concept of staying in your lane.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Chesterfield. I'm Ben Rayner, coming at you sort of live from my living room in Toronto, although not on my Chesterfield. This week, our guest is George Stroumboulopoulos, a Canadian radio and TV broadcaster who's pretty much done it all. He was the host of his own late night talk show on CBC called The Hour for almost a decade. He was on Much Music's The New Music, back when Much Music actually had a lot of music on it. He hosted Hockey Night in Canada for a couple seasons. And most recently, he signed on to be one of Apple Music's all-star international DJs. So George gets around. I'm excited to talk to him today, though, because we found common ground in his Chesterfield pick, which is probably the weirdest and wildest piece of children's entertainment ever produced in Canada, maybe even the world. A show called The Hilarious House of Frightenstein, which, despite running for just one season out of Hamilton on CHCH in 1971, has somehow stuck around in the background of popular culture ever since. Just a strange little artifact, and I'm very glad that George wants to talk about it. Before I bring up George, though, just a reminder that the Chesterfield is brought to you by Friends of Canadian Broadcasting. Now, we're a grassroots organization funded completely by individual Canadians such as yourself who care about telling our own stories in our own country. As simple as that. If you want to get involved, just go to friends.ca when you're done watching the video and see if you feel like helping out. And now, speaking of Canadian culture, on to the Hilarious House of Frightenstein. Let's get George on the line. I have a feeling this might get a little weird. Hello, George. Welcome to the Chesterfield. Are you in Toronto? I was sort of worried you might be in LA, but possibly on fire. Or
No fires yet. The fires have come close to me in the past. I have been evacuated in the past from where I lived in the woods in LA, but right now I'm in Toronto. So I'm locked behind my gate and just working all the time from the house into the city. So it's nice to be in Toronto. I haven't been in one city this long since 1999. So it's quite a different experience.
Well, I feel like you kind of made the best of this whole situation because you started your new gig with Apple Music, which is pretty exciting. Are you happy the way things have worked out in that regard?
Love it, man. I every day get to go on the radio and play music for 164 countries around the world. What could be better than that? Like, that's what I've always said it. TV, I like to do TV, and TV is what I do, but sharing music on the radio is kind of who I am. And this is a perfect opportunity.
Well, and today I'm excited to talk to you about, because here on the Chesterfield, we pick a Canadian cultural artifact that resonates deeply with us or that's influenced us. And you fell right into my trap and picked The Hilarious House of Frightenstein, which was huge for me when I was a kid. I think huge for a lot of Canadian kids, and maybe even kids in other countries, because this weird little show from CHCH in Hamilton has an astonishing shelf life, eh? So I'm curious why you picked it and how it resonated with you.
I'm not even sure I chose it as much as the algorithm conspired to put us in each other's paths, man. I was living in Rexdale, a compromised neighborhood in Toronto, just outside, and I remember living in my mom and I lived in this really small little spot. And our TV was from the garbage. We didn't get many channels. It was in the old days where you would have a hanger jammed into a broken antenna and try to pick up some stuff. So we got CHCH. And I think I was I must have been 4 or 5 when I stumbled across The Hilarious House of Frightenstein. And my mother didn't understand it. She said I was a happy kid, but I was too afraid to watch it alone, but I wouldn't miss it. So I'd wake her up. I think it was on at one point really early in the morning.
I recall it being on like before school and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So my mom said I would wake her up to make her go down to the living room and watch it with me. And it was as if the lights went out in my eyes. And, the Wolfman is the first radio person that I identified with, the second being Venus Flytrap and Johnny Fever. So that Wolfman, Jack, was a huge influence on me. Vincent Price with that amazing voice, all of the characters. Billy Van is a legend, and I think doesn't get talked about nearly enough in the canon of Canadian talent for what he did in Canada. Billy Van is almost near the top of my list, and Yeah, and I was
Also playing like virtually every part on this show, right?
every part. It was a classic, Greek or classic English theater kind of situation where he could do everything. But yeah, it was massive to me when I was 4 or 5 years old, and I love it. It sort of stayed with me the whole time. I remember episodes, I remember characters. I remember the hippie when I got to interview Mitch and have him in the house on the Strombo show. It was what a treat, because I mean he's kind of the last, the last living member of that family, and that family, that whole Frightenstein family were really important.
I guess for people who are not totally familiar with the show, we should like elucidate just how strange the Hilarious House of Frightenstein was, because the thing that struck me as most interesting, actually, when I was doing research for this, is the fact that I was like, wow, how did this one show that ran for a season in 1971 have such reach? And then you look, and they actually did 130 episodes in that one season, which is like 6 times what a normal TV season would be. So these guys were workhorses, and in service of something totally unique, eh? I mean, I think you think about what went on that show and the loose comedy and just the general strangeness of it. It's quite singular.
It is, and I think a big reason for that is the 70s. Like, I think that when I was watching it in the late 70s, the mid to late 70s, I guess, it was a strange decade. It was that pre-tech decade. Cars were still made of steel. Everything was just like, we didn't know then what we know now was the change in the 80s was going to come. But the 70s was a strange decade, and everything was a bit of a trip. And I think what made that show so singular is that it really leaned into its weirdness, and it didn't feel like a kid's show. And I think this idea of teaching kids to be kids is fine, but when your entertainment is designed for children, I mean, I'm 4 years old watching Frightenstein, right? Like, I never liked kids stuff, except for maybe Sesame Street. I don't like it now. And the same with the Muppet Show, man. The Muppet Show had Alice Cooper on it. Like, when we were kids in the 70s, they weren't protecting us. And I think that did us a solid. I think that I'm a better adult because of that.
I think you're right. Like, I remember, because we were from England. My parents hated it. It was just stupid. You know what I mean? And it did feel like it was something vaguely deviant, given the landscape. And I mean, like Sesame Street and the Muppets had their subversive moments, but this was like, I mean, if you were to pitch that, we're going to do a show with a vampire and a bunch of ghouls and some puppets. Every once in a while, a professor's going to shoot a rocket. There's these nominally educational elements, but generally in service of the silliness. And then at the end, you know what? We're going to play Three Dog Night, dance around on a green screen. It's like, I don't think you'd ever be able to pitch that again, would you? Like,
you couldn't now.
Get that off the ground.
You couldn't. I do believe that Sesame Street and the Muppets were totally subversive for sure. But what Frightenstein was doing was letting kids know, fly your freak flag high. Fly your freak flag high. They weren't trying to explain ways for us to fit in. I haven't watched all the episodes since, so maybe it was somewhere in there, but I don't remember any time watching that show feeling like I had to learn. It was more learning about how you can be you, like, be weird. And everything else for kids shows pretends to get you to embrace your individuality, but we really know they just want you to be cogs in the machine. And Frightenstein never wanted me to be a cog in the machine. And I really am grateful for that. And you're right, you couldn't pitch it today because it would be hyper vetted, hyper educated. You'd have Twitter to deal with. You'd have armchair warriors. Like, you'd have all these things that would prevent the magic from happening. And I think that Frightenstein, 160 plus episodes on a small local channel, right? A small local channel, that is like lights out.
Somehow they wrote Vincent Price into it too, which is crazy. It's like, come to Hamilton and be on our weird show.
And he said yes, and he was amazing in it.
It seems like this weirdly innocent time in Canadian television, where maybe it was just like, hey, here's the keys to the studio, do what you will. I don't think
SCTV in Edmonton, right? SCTV doing their show in Edmonton, Hamilton having the Frightenstein stuff. Like that's some pretty incredible output.
No, and again, I don't think you'd be able to get away with it these days. I do like, there was a quote, you interviewed Mitch Markowitz, who's his brother Riff was the creator a few years ago, and I like this quote. You say, "I look now at my artistic choices today, and I can point them directly back to that show." Yeah. Could you elaborate on that? I mean, how has it influenced you in the grand scheme of things?
I was walking.
I mean, you're wearing a Misfits shirt. That's
a Misfits shirt. Yeah, I mean, pretty much all of the music that I like I like all the hippie stuff and the rock and roll that they were playing on that show. And I think my influences for music came because also in Toronto, you know what, it's worth noting that Frightenstein existed at a time when in Toronto, at the very least, there were two radio stations that really challenged young people. One was Q107 at the time, and one was CFNY at the time. And in the late 70s and the early 80s, both those channels appealed to a younger audience, but they weren't protecting us. They were really playing wild stuff, and the DJs were saying dangerous things. So maybe, you know, I was watching Frightenstein in the morning and Q107 was playing in the afternoon, or CFNY was playing at night in my home. And all of this stuff hit me at the right time. They say that you make your sports team and your entertainment choices between 5 and 7 years old, that every human being does. And whatever mattered to you then in some, tangential way is going to matter to you now. That's when I was watching hockey. That's when, just right after that, when I discovered the Magic Johnson, Larry Bird era of basketball, Dr. J. And that's when I stumbled across Night of the Living Dead, Q107, CFNY, and Frightenstein. So my house is loaded with artifacts of the skulls and the devils and the heavy metal, and it all comes back to that creepy stuff.
It is funny that you and I've known you for like 20 years. I didn't realize we had horror in common until.
Oh yeah, huge.
It is funny that we watched Frightenstein when we were kids, and we both have a house full of skulls and horror thing.
I mean, look, like I've got skulls everywhere, just sort of floating around in the house.
My 3-year-old daughter is into spookies, probably because her parents watch nothing but horror movies. And I actually have to try Frightenstein out on her. I wonder if 3 is too young, but I was, it didn't do us any harm.
3 is young, but you never know.
But you know what? You can also relate, I think, to some extent, George, just the idea of getting stuff done. Because, although you've worked for Much and the CBC and you've had these stuff, you're very much like doing your own thing when nobody's handing it to you. And I think that's also something you can take away from Frightenstein, because I think it's just like, we're just going to do our own weird thing until they stop.
I think when you watch it enough, and then you realize that Billy Van is everybody. You don't know that right away. When you're young, you're watching it, you just think it's actors. And then you start to realize over time, Billy Van is doing everything, which shatters the concept of staying in your lane. It's like, you can do anything you want. You can be anything you want. It looked like a busy show for sure. It looked like a lot of fun. But yeah, 100%, man, this idea of be you, be weird, be dark, and don't apologize for it.
Do you think, I mean, when you look at a show like that, I mean, obviously Canada doesn't have a monopoly on ghouls and Frankensteins and Harvey Wallbanger and all this stuff. But is there anything that strikes you as kind of quintessentially Canadian about a show like because it does. It has the sensibility. I don't think it could have come from anywhere else. Probably not from anywhere else but Hamilton, for that matter.
I think you're right about that. And I think, we tend to talk about, as Canadians, we tend to talk about this country as this thing. But actually, and I think growing up poor in the ethnic side of Toronto, my ethnic west side of Toronto, Canada, sure. But really, the Canada that I grew up in was actually just Toronto and my neighborhood, which was diverse and rough and really, really blue collar. So I kind of think that it's not so much that it's Canadian, but it's, to your point, it's Hamilton. It's a really blue collar show. I think it would work in Pennsylvania. I think it would work in Michigan. I think it would work in Wisconsin. I don't think it works in Grosse Pointe. I think that it works in places So I think that show felt
this is more of a coal country kind of show.
It's a blue collar show for sure. I mean, look, Frightenstein's not a bright show. It's not a bright show to look at. It's not a bright show to experience. So I think it's a combination. I think it's the alchemy of where it was made, the people that made it, the era it was made in, where the era they're from, and probably, and I don't remember the name of the station manager, but hopefully they don't have a spotty past, but give them a statue. Because the person that said yes to that, that's the genius. Because I want to know who else was pitching wicked cool shows like that never got made, right?
Again, the fact that this thing that ran, for 1971 is still ran. You know what? I don't know if you're aware, there was a spoken word kind of play record called Return to Frightenstein that was put out last year, I think, with Malcolm McDowell filling in for Billy Van. And now they're talking about doing a reboot. It's quite an astonishing life for something that is really just a blip.
Yeah, that's it's an interesting thing, looking back at this little blip. But again, it's sometimes you just get it right.
I do say there's a lesson maybe learned from something like Hilarious House of Frightenstein, where you just get on with doing what you do, and damn the torpedoes. And I mean, we're buds. I don't have to butter you up, but I'm happy that you've landed on your feet yet again, because you work very hard, George, and you deserve it.
Here's the direct line to that show: be yourself. Be yourself. Be unapologetic about it. It's not like Hilarious House of Frightenstein was on the air, got canceled, and then there were 10 million people signing petitions to bring the show back, which is what we have now, right? I get emails all the time. Bring back this show. I'm like, I didn't even watch that fucking show. Why am I going to sign your petition? Shows start, shows end. That's how it works, right? Fans create, I get all that. It's not like House of Frightenstein lasted forever in terms of how many episodes they made. It's not like they had advocates for them. It was like our weird little secret. And it's okay to have your weird little secret. And I kind of look at everything I do in my career going, some stuff's bigger, some stuff smaller, some stuff is really successful, some stuff flops. But it's on my terms. It's my weird little secret. And that all comes from, that show.
Well, maybe it's time we dig into the whole 130 episodes online.
Dude, I didn't really
see how it holds up.
They're all on Crave. I'm going to watch them all.
Yeah, no, I went down a pretty deep rabbit hole last night, which is why I'm exhausted and contemplating a nap. Thank you so much for doing this, George. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, man.
Great to see you, brother. Congratulations.
Come back and we'll talk about seeing things next season.
Anytime.